What is going on, everybody? Welcome into Studs and Duds, the most comprehensive NFL player review series on the internet. Today we are going to be talking about all of the rising and falling players from the NFC conference from NFL weeks 5 through 7. In order to do that, we are going to be looking through the lens of my own ratings changes from my custom Madden roster. And I do want to remind you guys, while I don't make Madden content on this channel, I did just start a realistic Raiders rebuild over on my second channel, TFG Plays, recorded offline and put together with the help of my new editor. So if you miss some of the Madden content that we used to make years ago and you want to check it out, head over there. And then before we get started, if you want to take any of the information you might pick up in this video and apply it to your underdog lineups, making pick'em slips, which is the best way, in my opinion, to increase your interest in any given football game. Sign up using promo code TFG. They'll match up to $100 on your first deposit. You'll support my channel in a big way. If nothing else, just hit that like button. I really appreciate it. A ton goes into this series, and that like goes further than you know. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off with the Chicago Bears, whose star of the month, Tyson Bagent, out of left field, Shepherd University, a Division II school. Tyson Bagent as a rookie, getting some action here. He comes in against the Vikings. Some ups, some downs in that week 6 affair. But week 7 ends up getting the start with Justin Fields out and really did a good kind of game manager point guard performance in that game. Showed off some of his athleticism out of Division II. I thought the ball kind of popped out of his hand pretty well. Like, there's some traits there. So we're getting him up into that kind of competent backup quarterback range. We're going to get to see him here very soon on Sunday Night Football, a big test against the Chargers, just to kind of get another measuring stick performance from him. He was still, bailing out of a lot of clean pockets. I don't believe he pushed the ball beyond 20 yards in this game. So it was very, backup quarterback-y in terms of how they used him. But again, I think the tools are there. So as I've said on the Fully Inflated Football podcast this week, which, by the way, I do have a podcast. Make sure you go check that out over on the other YouTube channel, or just search Fully Inflated wherever you get your podcasts. But I was saying that, I'm intrigued. He's got the tools. He's got some swagger. I always love a traitsy player out of Division II because sometimes these guys just fly under the radar. So, he's a fun player. I think deserves star of the month. But let's visit some of these other offensive players. D'Onta Foreman getting his +2 back after we took 2 away from him last week, kind of being benched and not utilized here. I think he had a little bit of a show-me, pissed-off performance against the Las Vegas Raiders. He had a really impressive week, just running through linebackers and D-backs for the Raiders, kind of put the offense on his back, did some stuff through the air too. Remember, he kind of had a breakout for the Panthers last year. They choose to let him go in favor of Miles Sanders for a more expensive price tag. Foreman's a beast, man. He got the Kyle Brandt Angry Runs merchandise shirt of the week. Well-deserved. So, +2 for Foreman. And then the other running back playing the last couple of weeks, Darrington Evans, was a third-round pick, I want to say from the Titans several years ago, a traitsy player, I think out of Appalachian State. They ended up plucking him from Miami, and he climbs up the depth chart here due to some injuries to Herbert and the rookie Roshan. And Evans showed off some of that juice, man. Making some nice catches out of the backfield, some decent runs. Another traitsy small school player capitalizing on an opportunity here in Chicago. And then the fullback, Kari Blasingame. Once upon a time was one of the more well-known fullbacks in the NFL for the Minnesota Vikings and has been much more quiet as of lately, but kind of emerging here with Chicago, getting a good anywhere from 10 to 20 snaps a game in the last 4 or 5 weeks, and he's been blocking as well as he ever has. He's even getting involved getting the ball in his hands just because they have had some injuries at the running back room. But yeah, Blasingame just looks like a very functional, useful kind of hybrid fullback, getting some love here. Then just one player on this offensive line that has been playing pretty well. But Tevin Jenkins getting healthy, getting out there. mauling dudes in the run game, holding up in pass protection. Jenkins shows that he is a premium guard whenever he plays. It's just that's been the question mark for him. So the more he plays, the more good performance he's going to have and the more he's going to climb in these ratings. But then we flip over to the defensive side of the ball. Gervon Dexter for the second week in a row here, just kind of creeping up, the second-round pick out of Florida, getting some pressures, being functional in run defense. I think his get-off looks all right, which was a big question from him out of Florida, something he can continue to work on here. Gervon Dexter, early returns on still a pretty raw prospect, something this Bears defensive line desperately needed, especially because their big investment really over the offseason, other than Gervon Dexter, has not stepped up. Yannick Ngakoue, it is time to drop him. He was falling last year for the Indianapolis Colts, and he's been even less efficient this year. Just 19 pressures this season, which doesn't sound that bad, but it's on almost 250 pass rush snaps, just 2 sacks, and really game in, game out, you just don't feel his presence. And he's the same old Yannick Ngakoue as well, where he's a complete liability against the run. So I tried to temper expectations for this signing towards Bears fans, and I'd say it's been even worse than I predicted. He has really been a non-factor for the Bears. But this secondary is really stepping up. I think we all felt like this was the area of excitement and youth and potential for this defense heading into the year. And getting these guys out there, getting them healthy and playing together has really been fun to watch. You've got Kyler Gordon re-entering the lineup in the slot there. I've really enjoyed his kind of peskiness and game IQ from the slot there. Really, I mean, playing him outside in his rookie year was really always going to be a challenge for him. I'm sure he values that experience, but he always really projected as a slot corner in the NFL, and he's just playing well in there. He's flying to the ball. He's been much better from a coverage perspective from the slot, and he definitely looks like he's trending up. If he can stay healthy, I really do think Kyler Gordon has the potential to be one of these kind of like Mike Hilton, Kwan Williams types of top slot corners in the NFL, maybe even by season's end. He's just been really solid there, a true natural fit. And then Jalen Johnson, another guy, just got to stay healthy, man. The Bears have had a lot of these guys that when they play, they really impress you, but they feel like they're in and out of the lineup a whole lot. But Jalen Johnson, the last couple of weeks have been fantastic. The 2-interception performance against the Raiders just shut down. In the week before that as well, as we saw the Vikings against the Niners, they do still have a passing game without Justin Jefferson. They didn't have as much of it against the Bears, and Jalen Johnson shutting down guys on the outside is a big part of that. He's heading into a contract year, and if he keeps playing like he's been playing this year, he's going to be viewed as a true number one corner. The former second-round pick has, again, played really well when he's been healthy, and could be heading towards a pretty massive payday and some pretty big gains throughout this series for the rest of the season. And then the other second-round pick, this defense is just full of good second-round corners, I suppose, and Tyreek Stevenson as well is a player I really like that isn't going to move here because he's had his ups and downs, but looks the part. Anyway, Jaquan Brisker has been a little bit better in coverage the last couple of weeks after a rough 4-week start to his season, but his consistency and presence against the run has gotten even better this year. He's just a really good player, man. I don't know if his coverage ability will ever come along to be great, but I think it's at least solid, and he's a plus run defender on the back end. He's a nice player for them. And then Cairo Santos has been one of the best kickers in the NFL. We boosted him up last week. He just keeps nailing his kicks, man. He's been awesome, so he's going to go up another 2 this week. The Bears seem to have found their kicker, knock on wood, after some growing pains having departed from Robbie Gould. And then we have the Arizona Cardinals, who continue to have this kind of motley crew of journeyman vets and young rookies and all this, just kind of trying to show what they are for the future of this team. So it's going to be some guys rising, some guys falling, and that definitely makes it slim pickings for Star of the Month. But how about Zaven Collins, their former first-round drafted linebacker, has been primarily playing off the edge this season, and I was questioning this move early on. I didn't really see why. I thought he was okay at linebacker and, deserved a chance to kind of see what he could do there. But there was clearly a little bit of a vision here. He, in the last 3 games, has really come on. He's got 9 pressures, 2 sacks in the last 3 games, which is pretty solid. Like I said, it was slim pickings for Star of the Month. I don't want to overhype Zaven Collins. But he's putting on some good pass rush moves, and he is 6'4", 260. He's a good athlete. I also don't want to write him off either. So we're going to go with Zaven for Star of the Month. Will be fun to kind of see this continue to develop with his first year playing on the edge. But let's talk about the offense a little bit. Trey McBride, the year 2 second-round pick tight end, is showing that when they use him, he can step up, especially in that Rams game, a pair of really nice contested catches. And I do think he's trending towards being a starting tight end for this team sooner rather than later. Zach Ertz is still kind of that guy, and he just has not been dynamic at all, which wasn't horribly surprising for a 32-year-old tight end here. Not everyone can be Travis Kelce. But he also had a couple of uncharacteristic drops the last couple of weeks, and I think it's just time we drop Zach Ertz from his previous self. Then both these running backs here, Keontae Ingram has gotten a decent work share with James Conner getting hurt here. That Rams game was solid from Ingram. He had 40 yards on 10 attempts, a pair of catches in the receiving game. He's a decent kind of complimentary back. I'm not the biggest Keontae Ingram guy, but he's been fine. And then Amari DiMercado has really gotten the workload the last couple of weeks, as they still haven't had James Conner out here. This is a almost 25-year-old undrafted rookie free agent out of TCU who's spent the last few years, at least, behind Kendre Miller out there in TCU. But, DiMercado tested well himself, ran a 4.44. He's got some size at 215 pounds, 5'9". He's been breaking some tackles. He's looked the part, man. So he's going to come in. We actually had to create him in Madden. He wasn't in the game, so he's going to come in as a 69, and if he keeps continuing to play well, he can get himself up into a respectable rating for an undrafted free agent rookie there. But then on the offensive line, Elijah Wilkinson, the veteran that they brought in, who started for Atlanta last year and was adequate. Not so much this year for the Falcons. This move is not working out there at left guard. He's been just a turnstile at left guard. We use that term a lot, but it definitely applies to Elijah Wilkinson. Hasn't been great in the run game either, so I wouldn't be surprised if we see a new left guard in there pretty soon. But then back to the defensive side of the ball, Roy Lopez has been a very nice kind of journeyman pickup here. Journeyman at this point, at least, was drafted by the Houston Texans a few years ago. He is still young, and he's returning home to Arizona and playing for his home team here, defending the run, putting in some thump work up front. So he's going to go up +1. He's been solid for them, along with Dante Stills next to him, the day 3 rookie out of West Virginia, kind of playing that hybrid role, rotating in there, getting about 25, 30 snaps a game, which is pretty damn solid. And you just never know with these hybrid guys. Sometimes they get overwhelmed and they just can't really do anything all that well. But I would say Dante Stills at least looks the part. He's been able to kind of shoot gaps and make some plays against the run. And he's had a couple nice pass rush reps as well. Had a nice Week 5 game against Cincinnati. So, if they're finding a nice rotational kind of 4th or 5th piece for this D-line here in the 6th round, that's good drafting by the new regime. And then Victor Dimukeje has really seen his snap count drop off in recent weeks. He had that big burst onto the scene in our first episode of Studs and Duds. He's now only getting like 15, 17 snaps a game. So it's unfortunate that they're not really continuing to buy into him because he's played well and he's been around here waiting on an opportunity for so long. But, they got a lot of different guys they want to try out here. It is also somewhat understandable, but Dimukeje just continues to make plays when they do put him in there. So, the reduction in snap count has made it harder to give a big boost to him, but he is going to get a +1. He's gone up 6 already on the season. And then the linebacker Josh Woods is going to get a +2, 64 to a 66. Just has had some starts lately and has been okay against the run in his last 2 weeks. Just a couple notes here. BJ Ojulari has been I would say as advertised, I don't think he's done quite enough to go up. Small snap count. He's getting about a pressure every week. I just want to see a little bit more out of him as a player. We've got him rated as a 70, which is a good spot for a rookie. I think he's living up to that, though. So we'll keep an eye on if he can become a bigger part of this pass rush. And then I also just got to shout out Star Thomas. He's getting on the field. One of my favorite undrafted free agents out of UAB. He's had some ups, had some downs, but we'll keep an eye on him. I'm curious to see if we can get a boost for him if he starts playing better into the future. Okay, next up we have the Washington Commanders, who again, it's just 2 games to react to here, as we had them on the Thursday night game like the Bears in our last episode of Studs and Duds. But the star of the month for Washington is going to be former first-round pick Jamin Davis. Washington has had its ups and downs on the defensive side of the ball, but the third-year linebacker here is balling out this year, just as we talked about with him moving up in the last episode of Studs and Duds. And this is just exciting because Davis was such a freak coming out of Kentucky, lengthy 6'3" linebacker, built like Zach Cunningham, but 6'3", 234. And can run in the 4.4s, but for a couple years until like the second half of last year, basically like the first 20 games of his career, just horrible gap discipline, missed tackles. It just didn't feel like he belonged yet. But something has clearly clicked within this defense. Ron Rivera, the former linebacker himself, I think getting to him a little bit from a coaching perspective, but it's just, the 19th overall pick, it's finally paying dividends here in year 3. He's just sideline to sideline, tackles in the backfield. His run defense has really come along, and they'll tap into his athleticism as a as a blitzer as well. He's got a couple sacks on the season. From a coverage perspective, he does have an interception, a pass breakup this year. It feels like he's getting more comfortable there, but you do still see him out of position. He has been targeted a decent amount the last couple of weeks still. Actually was credited with 2 touchdowns allowed against the Giants. So I'm not going to rave about his coverage instincts quite yet, but if the game is slowing down for Jamin Davis and he's speeding up, it might only be a matter of time before the coverage side of things come along. So linebackers take time, and Davis here in year 3, definitely where they want him to be at this point. But let's talk a little bit about the offense before circling back to the defense. Jahan Dotson, not a single Commanders fan is going to be surprised to see him coming down in the ratings this week. Back-to-back weeks with a drop, has continued to struggle to become a part of this offense. He's been one of the more just overall disappointing players at large in the NFL. There's really no other way to slice it. He's just nowhere really to be found. And it's kind of weird considering when he played last year, he looked pretty good. But some gains on the offensive line. Sadiq Charles for the second week in a row is going to go up. He's just been fine. I know the Commanders are giving up a ton of sacks, but Charles, for the most part, has held his own. He had some losses against Dexter Lawrence, as everybody is going to, but the Bears game, the Falcons game, he's been better in pass protection than you might expect for Sadiq Charles. And he's creeping up there. He's been okay. And a lot of these sacks for Washington are on Sam Howell because he holds on to the ball so long. But the other offensive player going up here is going to be Chris Rodriguez, the running back they drafted in the 5th round here, another Kentucky rookie for them, as Davis was a couple years ago out of Kentucky. But Chris Rodriguez is a bit of a throwback running back. I enjoyed his tape coming out of Kentucky, and he's got shades of Brian Robinson, so it makes sense that he's kind of the relief pitcher to Brian Robinson. But the last couple of weeks, Chris Rodriguez, about 5 yards a carry on 11 attempts, coming in, breaking some tackles, providing a little bit of just good running that they don't necessarily get with Antonio Gibson, who's not as decisive and powerful as a runner. So he's been nice. And then I do want to talk about Sam Howell just a little bit. He's not going to see any changes to his ratings because he's just so up and down and has kind of played up to that 71 rating that we boosted him up to last week. He's had some ugly moments. He's made some big throws. It's not enough to raise him or drop him. He's been okay. But let's talk about this defense a little bit beyond Jamin Davis. And Chase Young is going to go up again here this week. Just continues to look like the former, blue chip prospect that he was. Looks healthy, looks awesome. Really, no other way to put it other than that. I mean, he's got now 35 pressures, 6 sacks on the season. And look, I understand why Washington declined his 5th-year option, but they're kicking themselves now for not doing it because they've got him coming up on a contract. They've got Montez Sweat coming up on a contract. Having to deal with both those guys at the same time is a handful from a financial point of view, especially with a new ownership group that just paid out a bunch of cash to buy this organization. So they've got to come up with another, $240 million if they're going to pay Chase Young and Montez Sweat. So they're dealing with it. I think they'd like to keep Chase Young. They'd like to keep Montez Sweat because they're just cornerstones of this team. But yeah, Chase Young definitely playing up to his potential this season. And it's just so fun to see his burst and athleticism and, the pass rush skill set really as well on top of all that. So well-deserved there. And then into the secondary, Danny Johnson has stepped in after they've benched the first-round pick Emmanuel Forbes, and what they've done is slid Benjamin St-Juste out to the perimeter corner position. St-Juste went up last week or last episode of Studs and Duds for his performance in the slot, but Danny Johnson is a really instinctive kind of high IQ, undersized corner that has had a lot of flashes in the NFL, and he's played really well. He's been rallying to the ball. He's been in position and coverage. This has been definitely a good move to shuffle around this secondary as the defense has played much better the last couple of weeks. And a big credit to Benjamin St-Juste as well for being able to step outside and look as good as he has. I mean, goodness, 3 pass breakups in that game against the Giants, was targeted 12 times in that game, did give up some yardage, but obviously made some incredible plays on top of it. So, he has looked very solid inside and out throughout the year. He's not the fastest corner in the world, and I think that is where you do see some of his coverage losses. But, he's at least a quality starter at this point in the NFL. So he's going to go up for the 2nd week in a row. And then just some other side notes here. Jartavis Martin has finally gotten into the rotation here. He played 7 snaps against the Falcons, had a wonderful sack on Desmond Ridder, showing off the speed and tackling as he did at Illinois, and then gets in for 5 snaps against the New York Giants and breaks up a pass. So it's not enough snaps for me to bump up his rating when he was one of my favorite 2nd-round picks in the draft. But I would love to see them find a way to get him some more snaps. It's tough because Danny Johnson's playing well. You got Forrest and Cam Curl, but Percy Butler does have 305 snaps this season, which is just about as many as Derek Forrest. So they do run a lot of 3 safety stuff, and I think it's time we hand those reps over to Jartavis Martin. Moving forward, I wouldn't be surprised if that starts as soon as this upcoming weekend against the Eagles. And then Cody Barton as well was playing horrible football in the first 5 weeks of the season, and we dropped him last week. Did have a better game against the Falcons, but then left the lineup week 7 with an injury before he could really show that he has kind of returned to form to what he was in Seattle last year, where he was, a decent enough player to get a free agent contract as a starter here. So, not enough to overwrite the rough start that we had to ding him for last week, but was definitely trending back in the right direction before the injury. Next up, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which will include the Thursday night game against the Buffalo Bills. But the star of the month is actually a repeat star of the month, double dipping with a huge breakout player for the Bucs, one of the biggest breakouts of the entire NFL this season. Luke Gedeke, the year 2 2nd-round pick out of Central Michigan, has figured things out, man. Getting back to playing his natural position of right tackle, just as we talked about last week. They tried him out at guard in his rookie season, and he ended up getting benched. His play strength couldn't handle it. But he does seem to have put on a little bit of functional strength, but also just getting back to his natural position has clearly helped the guy. And the funny thing is, he did get one start at right tackle late last season against Atlanta and played well. So they saw the tape there and they're like, hey, I think he might be a right tackle, which is funny because he was a right tackle when they drafted him. So he's playing awesome. I loved Gedeke coming out. Felt like he was super underrated, whereas his college teammate, Bernard Raymond, who's also having a good year, was getting all the hype. I was like, hey, this other tackle here is just as good, and it's playing out in the NFL. He actually ended up getting drafted ahead of Bernard Raymond, and it's just been a real blessing for this Bucs team because that right tackle spot was looking like a massive question mark because they moved Tristan Wirfs over to left after letting Donald Penn go. So, they've had their issues offensively, but Gedeke has not been one of them. So he's going up 4 this month and has gone up 8 on the season. But let's talk about Baker Mayfield a little bit. He's going to lose 1 after gaining 2 rating points last week. The shine of his kind of early season reemergence with some good performances against Minnesota and Chicago have really faded away. And just really going back to like week 3 against Philadelphia, he's kind of felt much more like a backup. He's a tough player to analyze, right? He was a former first-round pick. He has played well within this season. And it's not like everything's been perfect around him. They don't have any semblance of a run game, so he's ended up in a lot more difficult drop-back pass situations. But when you see him out there against the Bills trying to lead a comeback effort, and the Bills a couple times just blitzed him, and he just drops his head, stares at the rush, doesn't even really look downfield, that's a major concern. That's some Carson Wentz type of stuff. So I even thought about a -2 for Baker, kind of back where he started coming in. I still think he's had an okay season, but overall I do wonder if the Bucs might, with a long week ahead here and still a bye week to come, I don't know when their bye week is, but if they might start considering Kyle Trask. I'm not saying that's the answer, but they might want to see what they have there after the Bucs have lost 4 straight on this stretch. But Rachaad White is going to go up +1 again, and it really just is the receiving chops. He is one of the more polarizing running backs in the league in terms of how different he is running versus receiving. And I'll give a shout out to Mike Renner, who pointed out coming out like Rachaad White might be better as a receiver in the NFL than a running back. And, I think he's in a good spot as a receiving back, but that has aged pretty well when you look at his splits, run versus pass. But anyway, the last couple of weeks, man, as they've kind of admitted that their run game can't go anywhere, they have really featured Rachaad White in the receiving game. He is 13 of 13 the last 2 weeks, 6 targets against Atlanta, 7 against Buffalo last night. 65 yards, 70 yards, a super consistent about 10.5 yards per reception. But even more impressive than that, in those 2 games, he's made 8 defenders miss after the catch, 15 on the season. That leads all running backs in the NFL in missed tackles forced through the air. And then he only has 17 missed tackles forced on the ground on 92 attempts versus his 29 receptions. So it just goes to show you he's much more comfortable just kind of transitioning after the catch, getting to use that nice juke move he has in space. And it is a legit weapon for them, but it is a difficult balance that they're trying to find because he just continues to be so bland as a runner. Not a lot of vision or power in that phase. Granted, he was a little bit better last night against the Bills on the ground. But hey, what good would this series be if we didn't use this as an opportunity to talk about guys that just shouldn't be playing right now? And that is Keyshawn Vaughn, the other running back here in Tampa. Now, to Tampa's credit, they've finally figured this out. He only had, I think, 4 snaps against Buffalo. That number should come down to 0 in future weeks. I just don't really understand why he's still here. It feels kind of like a Jason Light stubborn thing because he drafted the guy in the 3rd round and he's holding out hope that he can be good. I disagreed with the pick from the very get-go. He was horrible throughout the Tom Brady era, and now with Baker Mayfield, he's failing to be an impact in the receiving game. In fact, he's been a liability, bad drops and poor pass protection. And it's even worse when they hand the ball to him. It's like he just runs straight into the back of the offensive line, which isn't getting any push. There's no elusiveness. It's led to a embarrassing 1.7 yards per attempt on 20 carries this season. So I think it's time for Jason Light to, stop digging in a hole and, let's see Sean Tucker. Let's see a little bit more Chase Edmonds. It just is not working with Keyshawn Vaughn. But then it's not just Luke Gedeke going up on the offensive line, Tristan Wirfs as well. This has been one of the better tackle tandems in the league this year, and Tristan Wirfs transitioned from the right side to the left side, from a gap scheme to a zone blocking scheme in the run game. It has all been seamless. He is genuinely one of the best offensive linemen in the entire NFL, having an all-pro caliber season. This guy's been pretty much automatic since he came into the league. And then Aaron Stinney as well, a backup offensive lineman, got the start against the Buffalo Bills, held up okay. He's been hanging around here. He's been in Tampa since 2020. He's gotten some spot starts. Good to see that they have a functional backup if Matt Filer or someone isn't available for any given week, a guy that can play center or guard. And then onto the defensive side of the ball, I do want to mention Calijah Kancey. Not going to see a boost here, but I think he's living up to the kind of first round pedigree, and it does not appear that his lack of size down there at like 6'1", 280 pounds or whatever he is going to prevent him from getting after the quarterback. He's been showing a lot of the similar stuff he did at Pittsburgh in terms of his combination of quickness and leverage. It just can blow by offensive linemen. He's had some really impressive pressures. I want to see a little bit more before we start to raise him. But it has definitely been like as good as advertised. I will say the run defense has been quite poor from Kancey, which isn't a huge surprise, but I did think it'd be maybe a little bit better because his core strength was so good on film at the college level. But you do see him giving up a lot of ground against the run, and sometimes with these sort of undersized hybrid 3-tech types, you at least want to see them consistently splash into the backfield and knife in and stop some plays. Just 2 defensive stops for Calijah Kancey. He's pretty much been a straight-up liability against the run. But again, as a pass rusher, he's looked the part. But no change to his rating. He's at a 73 right now, I think is fair. But the other rookie, Yaya Diaby, has been getting into the lineup, and he's doing some cleanup work. He had a good, I don't know if that was the sack he registered or not. I think it might have been against the Bills, where Josh Allen thinks he can win the angle on Yaya Diaby. I tweeted out that Josh Allen must not be a draft nick because he should have known that Yaya Diaby is super fast, and you're not going to win the edge on Yaya Diaby. But he's been really physical against the run, which is something he did really well at Louisville. If you remember, he was kind of this weird player in that he's built like an edge very much. He's 6'3", 263, but Louisville used him as a defensive tackle. So it's not a big surprise that he can get physical and shed blocks against the run, and he is showing that early. There hasn't been too much of a pass rush skill set there in terms of winning one-on-one matchups quite yet, but he definitely looks the part and has been a nice part of that edge rotation for them. And then the slot corner, Christian Izien, has been very up and down in coverage, but the undrafted rookie out of Rutgers, if nothing else, is flying around. It does feel like he's kind of their clutch defensive stop guy when opposing offenses try to throw to the flat or get the corner against the run. He's been shutting shit down, and that counts, even if you do have some coverage losses. So he's going to keep going up. Nice kind of burst into the league for the undrafted kid. But Antoine Winfield Jr., I thought about making him the star of the month just for his performance against the Atlanta Falcons alone. I raved about him on the podcast last week. You could argue, he certainly stopped at least 10 points of offense for Atlanta with a huge pass breakup on Drake London, who's got like half a foot on him, and then the strip sack, just the punch out on Desmond Ridder, who was walking into the end zone. He showed off the speed and the awareness and effort on that play, but he also made that big tackle on Drake London that forced him airborne, that they reviewed for like 5 minutes and then set up a first and goal from the 1-yard line, in which the Falcons fumbled. So you could argue there was another 7 points that Antoine Winfield stopped there by getting Drake London down to the ground. All year, he's been awesome. I've always been a big Antoine Winfield fan, but he really seems to be reaching his full potential here. I think he's definitely in the conversation for the top 5 safeties in the NFL, if not even more. I mean, I think he's severely outplayed Derwin James this season. Kevin Byard just got traded to the Eagles for a bag of peanuts. I think he's better than Justin Simmons at this point. It's really Minka, Jesse Bates, and then I'll take Antoine Winfield and argue him, with any other safety in the league. So he's just been incredible. What an asset. Him and Tristan Wirfs coming in the same draft the year Tom Brady signed there, just really changing the landscape of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers organization. That said, the other safety, Ryan Neal, this isn't so much working out. Neal had a huge year for the Seahawks last year, filling in for Jamal Adams. But a lot of people were kind of scratching their head, asking why his contract was just 1 year, $1.3 million for a guy that had as good of a year last year. And yeah, this is why. He is giving up about as many yards in coverage as anybody, at least for safeties. He's allowing a perfect quarterback rating when targeted, a completion percentage of 95% for 250 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's not going to cut it. So I don't know. They don't really have any other options right now, but yeah, he's been bad, really bad for them, and he'll keep falling if he keeps playing like this. I'll say that. Next up, the Dallas Cowboys, who just 2 games to react to here. They were on bye week 5. Let's start on the defensive side of the ball with the star of the month, Osa Odigizua, for the 2nd month in a row going up. Just continues to climb, man. Really, since the second he came into the league, was a nice impact rookie as a 3-tech, but man, he's been an impact. And with Mazi Smith, their first-round pick, having a slow start to his rookie season, to say the least, it's been such a luxury that Osa Odigizua is not just doing what he's done getting after the quarterback, where he continues to look better and better, but man, he's taken a next step in terms of run defense. I feel like he is a really heady player on top of his athleticism. He's got a good feel for where the run is going, and he allows that to help him with his size deficiencies. This is a guy that's only, 290 pounds, about 6'1", 6'2", but he's got good core strength too. He doesn't just get bullied up in there, so he's a legit stud, and yeah, one of my favorite players on this Cowboys team. But let's stick on the defensive side of the ball, because that's where the positive vibes are coming from here with the rest of the Cowboys movement this week. Marquise Bell, for the 2nd episode of Studs and Duds in a row, is going to climb. He's gone up 6 on the season. The former undrafted free agent safety out of Florida A&M last season. Just a freaky athlete, 6'3", 205 pounds, ran a really fast 40. I don't remember exactly what the number was. I think it might have even been in the 4.3s, but, a small school, traits-based kind of developmental prospect couldn't have gone to a better spot. The team that has turned Jaron Kearse, a former 7th-round, 6'4", freaky safety, into a stud. Now, Marquise Bell's a little different. They originally were using him similar to Jaron Kearse when we boosted him last week. If you remember, the Cowboys were kind of boat racing everybody, so they got to kind of play around with their new toy here, Marquise Bell. But with some injuries at linebacker, he has actually had to play some earlier down work in their nickel defense as a linebacker, and he's held up. Now, they list him at 6'3", 205. That's pretty damn light for a real linebacker, so either he's heavier than they're listing him, or he's not going to be able to be a long-term, full-time starter as a linebacker. But how about as a long-term Jaron Kearse replacement, where he has played a lot of that kind of slot corner, strong safety, weak side linebacker stuff that Kearse does all the time. I love that fit. But at least for now, he's been a really nice role player for them as a two-way player. He is good against the run, especially when it is later in the downs, like, draws and that kind of stuff where he's not necessarily having to thump. He can just run and chase and tackle, where he's been a super consistent tackler this year. Just one missed tackle on 26 total tackles. But also a really nice pass breakup against the Chargers, showing his safety instincts in the middle of the field there too. So a really intriguing player that I'm sure Cowboys fans are really excited about in terms of, for the Madden players out there, because this is a Madden roster. He's going to be a fun one if you're able to use him at linebacker, because he's got, real speed. Anyway, Damone Clark, the other linebacker, continues to step up. My Damone Clark over Quay Walker take continues to look better and better. Quay's been fine this year too, but I could not believe that Quay was a first-round pick and Damone Clark went as late as he did. Now, Clark had an injury situation, but these were two very similar players out of the SEC, and Clark has been a super consistent tackler. He's been in good position in coverage, and for a year two linebacker, he's been pretty solid against the run. He's just a really good three down linebacker that has been a nice relief for them for him to continue to step up, because that's been a position group in question since they've kind of taken Micah Parsons and said, yeah, you're not a linebacker, for good reason. But especially in a week where Leighton Vander Esch is out. He had a good game against the Chargers. And then how about the kicker? Getting some love, Brandon Aubrey. Really fun story. Dude was sitting on his couch, had been playing professional soccer, and I think it was his wife was like, hey, you could do that, watching an NFL game with kickers making kicks. Came through ways of the XFL or USFL, one of the two, and is now the starting kicker for the Dallas Cowboys. And outside of one PAT, he has not missed a kick this year. So what a find Brandon Aubrey has been for the special teams. But let's talk about the offense that has had definitely an up and down week, or at least month. They really had a rough outing against the San Francisco 49ers, and that's where I do want to talk about Dak, who gets a plus and a minus this week. If we were evaluating him off of the Niners game, we might have dropped him. If we were evaluating him off of the Chargers game, we might have raised him. Just a very polarizing couple of games in this stretch. And that's kind of what Dak has been throughout his career. But did want to talk about how well he played against the Chargers, picking them apart. But some of his skill players are not really stepping up. We thought he kind of had a super team around him in Dallas, and between Tony Pollard, Michael Gallup, Brandon Cooks, these guys have not been as advertised. Tony Pollard, maybe he's just not 100% healthy yet. I'm willing and open to the idea that he could get better into the future as time goes on here, but he just has not been the same guy. And his yards per attempt are down, his missed tackles forced are down, his yards after contact are down. They were leaning on him to be the feature back here, and he just has not been that guy for them. Dare I say they kind of miss Zeke. After all that conversation, Zeke's been all right for the Patriots this year, but Michael Gallup we thought maybe he could be healthy this year after he kind of rushed back last year. The injuries do seem to be catching up with him. Just not a lot of juice there. He's 2 for 12 as well on contested catch opportunities. If Michael Gallup isn't converting those, that's a problem, because that's really what has made him such a good presence here is his chemistry with Dak, who really trusts him in a pinch to go make a tough catch, and he has not been able to do that at a consistent level this year. So sometimes those things just come back to earth, but it's been a couple of really slow years for Michael Gallup, and it's definitely time we give him a decent drop. And then Brandon Cooks, I feel like this is more of a usage thing in the new offense, maybe a lack of chemistry with Dak. But where are you at, Brandon Cooks? I know he had a nice touchdown against the Chargers, which maybe that's some signs for life, but looking at just these last couple of weeks, but also just his season on a whole, just over 100 yards on the year, just 13 catches, 8.4 yards per attempt. This isn't the Brandon Cooks that we've known throughout the years, and this isn't the Brandon Cooks that the Cowboys thought they were getting. And next up, we have the Philadelphia Eagles, and the star of the month is going to be probably who you expect, the guy that you can't really think about the Philadelphia Eagles this month of October without thinking about A.J. Brown, not just the stats and the performances, but the aesthetic of the dark visor and his intimidation factor, the Kelly green jerseys. It has really been the month of A.J. Brown, and I think this month he has made the statement that he is not just, an elite wide receiver. I think we've already viewed him as a tier, an alpha. And I think this month has been a great month for A.J. Brown to kind of make a statement that not only is he a number one, not only is he an alpha, he is one of these true tier one elite of the elite wide receivers, up there with Tyreek Hill and Justin Jefferson, and depending how you think about Devontae Adams these days, but these wide receivers that just have superpowers, and A.J. Brown's superpower is his play strength. You can't bump him off his route. You can't slow him down in his route. You can't really contest the ball because with his outreached arms, he's just going to outmuscle you. But beyond that, when he's tracking the deep ball, he's unfazed by contact. And it's set the Eagles up where even though they have all this amazing stuff, the O-line, Hurts and Goddard and Devonta Smith, even though they have all this other amazing stuff, even when they run into some difficult moments, whether it's 3rd and long, or maybe it's a week where, Lane Johnson goes down and Jack Driscoll's struggling, or maybe it's a week where Devonta Smith's not having a good week. As we're going to see later, those guys are actually seeing reductions in the ratings here this week. They can just chuck it up to A.J. Brown, and he's going to moss guys down the field. It feels like, a 50-50 ball for him is truly a 70% ball as long as Hurts puts it in the proximity. So it's just another cheat code for this Eagles team. And we're gonna give A.J. Brown his dues this week as the star of the month. But I am going to raise Jalen Hurts, which some of you might say, what, really? After the Jets game? And I get it. He was horrible in that Jets game. Truly like the worst game of Jalen Hurts' career, at least since he became this kind of star quarterback. And I gave him plenty of criticism for that. But the reality is, if we're looking at this 3-week stretch, I think for one, week 5 in that Rams game, he responded and played his best game on the season at that point in time after a little bit of a slower first 4 weeks of the season. But then, of course, the Dolphins game where he's out there without all of the mobility that he's used to having. He's clearly banged up a little bit, but, showing, I think, the best pocket presence he's ever shown in his life. He had all of the answers for the Miami Dolphins. The accuracy down the field just continues to impress with Jalen Hurts. So the at-large look from these 3 weeks, I think Jalen Hurts has played really well, even though that Jets game did happen. But the Jets have also forced the worst games of the season, of their season, out of Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. So, Hurts is going to go up, but it is not all rainbows and butterflies for this offense. In fact, they're still kind of struggling to figure out their running back situation. I mean, Swift's been okay for sure. Not quite what he was on that Vikings game. But Kenneth Gainwell has really struggled, and this is surprising to me. I liked Kenneth Gainwell. I thought he had kind of Austin Eckler potential. Thought he had really good play strength relative to his size. But he's just not been an effective runner, man. He's not making anybody miss. His yards per contact is lower. Yards after contact is lower than it's ever been. And we know this is a situation that's supposed to be extremely running back friendly, and he's just not capitalizing on it. So I hate to do it. I love Kenneth Gainwell. I hope he responds and sees some ratings boosts in the future, but he's just got to play a lot better, man. And then Devonta Smith, it seems to be I don't know if he's in his head or if he's hurt or what, but he just hasn't been the same old reliable Devonta Smith. He's still made some impressive catches, and I'm not trying to overreact here, but he's had some uncharacteristic drops. He's struggled to be a mainstay in this offense. I think we need to just kind of pump the brakes on him a little bit here, and hopefully he can bounce back. But then on the offensive line, Jordan Mailata just keeps getting better, man. The Aussie, the 6'8", 360-pound monster, 7th-round pick. This dude's just such a stud, continuing to climb towards being really one of the best left tackles in the game. Their backup tackle, on the other hand, not so much. Jack Driscoll, I like Jack Driscoll. I think he's a good technician, and he's had some good starts in his past. He's played some guard But he had to step in that Jets game against a really good pass rush, and Bryce Huff and company just ate his lunch. And you're definitely going to have a little bit more pause if Lane Johnson or Jordan Mailata go down and Jack Driscoll has to step in again, because he really did have Jalen Hurts running for his life, and that was a big part of why Jalen Hurts had the bad game he did against the Jets as well. But let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball, and they've been much better as of late after, I don't know, I thought they were just kind of in the first month of the year, but they've kind of come on lately for sure, and Jalen Carter just continues to look the part. His efficiency is just crazy. Now, his snap count still isn't crazy high. He's only played 183 snaps on the season, and he did miss that Week 6 game as well against the Jets. But the dude's got 27 pressures and 4 sacks on just 151 snaps. You project that out to like a, full season of play, and that's over 100 pressures based on that pressure rate, based on like the average snap count for a normal defensive tackle. So that's up there towards your, peak Fletcher Cox years, honestly. And people forget that Fletcher Cox had a year that he was like neck and neck with Aaron Donald. So we're talking like that echelon of pass rush win rate and pressure percentage. Now, it is, I think, still notable the defensive lines he's faced. The offensive. Now, I do still think it's notable. The offensive lines he's faced were that horrible Patriots line where they had 2 day 3 rookies starting in their first game of the season. You had the Minnesota Vikings earlier in the season before their O-line kind of fixed some things. Tampa Bay, who's not a good offensive line. Washington, who's not a good offensive line. The Rams, who don't have a good offensive line. And the Dolphins, who don't have a good offensive line. So I'm really not trying to take things away from Jalen Carter. I'm obviously boosting him up, and he's incredible, and his swim move is like unblockable. But he still really hasn't faced any notable interior offensive linemen. It's been a very warm welcome to the NFL in terms of his competition. So it's not a knock on him. I think it's just something to keep an eye on, and maybe a little bit of a reason why this isn't like a +3 for Jalen Carter and just a +1. But then one of his running mates, Milton Williams, has had a really good run these last 3 weeks. And, something you'll notice with these undersized defensive linemen, which Milton Williams is, he plays around 285, is they play really well against wide zone blocking schemes because they can move with these move blocking, outside zone stretch run blocking schemes, kind of ride the wave, if you will, and then pick their spot and slip through, as opposed to some of these undersized guys might struggle a little bit more against power or double teams against inside zone. And Milton Williams these last 3 weeks against, again, the Rams, the Jets, and the Dolphins, all at their core, wide zone blocking offenses. Milton Williams has had probably the best run defense stretch of his career, and very clearly has that aspect of defending the outside zone figured out. And, it's just good to see. So he's going to get a +1. He's had some success as a pass rusher too. 6 pressures and a sack between the Rams game and the Jets game. So was a raw player coming in and seems to be continuing to develop his game. But then into the second level, the free agent linebacker pickup, Zach Cunningham, is going to go down 1. It's not so much that he's sucked or even struggled all that much. It's just that those that have been around the channel know I have a lot of respect and view Zach Cunningham very highly. It's been about 2 seasons since we've seen Zach Cunningham now play as one of these dominant run-defending linebackers. He's been more just solid for the Eagles. Just hasn't quite been that high-end enforcer that he was back kind of when he left Houston and went to Tennessee. Also has been missing some tackles the last few games. So just a little -1 for Cunningham. I still think it was a good pickup, and he's a nice player for them. But then the safety group, Reed Blankenship, continues to have success on the back end in both phases. He is a super consistent tackler coming downfield, and he's been in position in coverage. This is just a good player. And the fact that Howie Roseman can do all these other things and find undrafted free agents like Reed Blankenship, who are like quality starting safeties for them, it's just another example of why he's such a cheat code of a GM. And by the way, Another one, Eli Ricks, the undrafted cornerback out of Alabama, who I had a 4th-round grade on, has been getting into the lineup and making some plays. I've got him rated out pretty well for an undrafted guy. He's only played 40 snaps. But if he's in there starting and playing like this, Ricks is going to go up pretty quickly. And then I am going to lower Kevin Byard. I think even if he was still on the Titans, he would have come down probably 1. Just hasn't really been in position in coverage. He has given up a decent chunk of yardage. And then you go and see him traded for a 5th and a 6th round pick. He's 30 years old. I still think he's a great safety. And he gets a very respectable 89 grade. And the Eagles are going to be very lucky to have this player. But I don't think he's really, rated as a 91 there. That was basically saying he's in a tier with Minkah Fitzpatrick and Jesse Bates. I don't think he's quite that player at this point. Maybe he proves me wrong with the Eagles. Going to a completely different system now, by the way, than he's played in Tennessee. So I think it's fair to drop him a couple, but still an amazing acquisition for this Eagles team. And I can't wait to see him in the Kelly Greens. Okay, next up we have the Atlanta Falcons, whose star of the month was a difficult choice between Nate Landman and Dee Alford. I mean, call them co-stars of the month if you want. Really great scouting here by Terry Fontenot and company for the Falcons. Both these guys were undrafted free agent pickups last year. Alford showed some flashes at the end of last season in a limited opportunity, but this year for Alford, they ended up drafting Clark Phillips out of Utah. A lot of people thought was a steal as a potential starting slot corner out the gate for them. They also picked up Mike Hughes. So they had some options and some competition from that slot position, but Dee Alford kind of wins that position out, and he is balling out right now. No relation, by the way, to former Falcons cornerback Robert Alford. I had to look that up. At least as far as I can tell, there's no relationship there. But the kid out of Tuscaloosa, Tennessee, on the season already has 4 pass breakups. Teams have been going after him, and as any slot corner will, he's been allowing some receptions, but just 9.4 yards per reception. Pretty damn solid. Also a big-time pass breakup against C.J. Stroud and the Texans. But maybe even more impressively is he's 5'11", 175, which gives him good fluid movement skills and coverage ability, but he's physical against the run. He's missed just 1 tackle on the season with 22 total tackles. And all in all has been a real blessing for this Falcons team. Obviously, they were hoping to get something from Clark Phillips, but once he went down, there was a big question on kind of how this cornerback depth was going to look, and Dee Alford showing that he wasn't just a fluke in those limited opportunities last year. So he's been real nice, real fun. But let's talk about the offense a little bit. Desmond Ridder taking a bit of a U-turn here. We dropped him 3 last week after that embarrassing performance against the Jaguars. Now, you do have to keep in mind here that this episode here is also going to include his performance against the Washington Commanders in Week 6, which was, again, brutal, throwing picks left and right, and I still just don't think Desmond Ridder is the answer. But if you look at his game against Houston, easily the best passing performance of his career, was really big time in that game, including a nice game-winning drive. And then Tampa Bay as well was really moving the ball well through the air, making good decisions, throwing with accuracy, running the offense really well. Granted, he also had the fumbles in this game. 2 really on him, fumbling out the back of the end zone while scrambling, and then another trying to step up in the pocket, trying to make a play, got strip sacked from behind. So I still, his pocket presence drives me crazy. His ball security is some of the worst in the league, and I still think he's playing more like a backup than a starter right now. But 2 of the last 3 weeks, he's shown that he is in control of this passing game, and the Falcons' offense has actually been checking a lot of boxes in terms of their ability to move the ball. They just got to stop turning the ball over in the red zone, and Ridder has got to be a part of that. But he's going to get some of those ratings back that we took away for his first month of the season. Then this team also acquired Van Jefferson, who was already on the downfall for the Rams, so that trade alone isn't a good sign. He also got a deep target in his first game with the Falcons. Not that it's really his fault, but was out of sync with Desmond Ridder and has yet to do anything for the Falcons since he's arrived. I like Van Jefferson's route running, but he has a bit of a lacking it factor as a wide receiver in terms of ball skills. And I think that's why the Rams parted ways with him. But on the offensive line, Drew Dahlman just continues to kick ass, take names as a run blocker. This dude's a phenomenal athlete, a smart guy out of Stanford, 6'3", 300 pounds, kind of like the prototype size for a wide zone blocking center, because he's light enough to get athleticism and short enough to get that easy leverage. It shows, man. He really is good at sealing off nose tackles, one techs. He can reach a two tech with his athleticism. He's the perfect center for this system. I raised some questions when they benched him. When they benched Matt Hennessy for Drew Dahlman, but they clearly had the vision that Dahlman was going to be the better player in time, and we've reached that point. He still struggles in pass protection quite a bit, actually, but in terms of his run blocking, he is that dude for a wide zone blocking scheme. And then let's talk about this defense. They've got a rotational random player I've never heard of here, LaCale London, getting into the mix, getting some stops up front against the run. They picked him up from the Bears. But then these linebackers, Caden Ellis and Nate Landman, two very different acquisitions for this team. Landman, as we mentioned, an undrafted rookie last year out of Colorado. Caden Ellis, who follows Ryan Nielsen, the defensive coordinator, over from New Orleans, was a later career breakout for the Saints last year. Both these guys playing super well. Both have been remarkably consistent tacklers, and that's really where Ellis has continued to impress. Not that he's been a bad tackler necessarily, but his tackle rate has been elite this year, so he's been really good the last few weeks. And then Nate Landman especially. This dude just plays with his hair on fire. He plays like, every snap could be his last opportunity in the NFL, and it's leading to some really just high energy run defense, not just from him, but I think his energy is actually pretty contagious. Like, honestly, you feel it. He makes a big hit, and then the rest of these guys get fired up. They've been really physical and actually one of the best run defenses in the NFL this year, and both these linebackers are a big part of it. But you could argue Nate Landman an even bigger part than Caden Ellis. So these guys are awesome. They do have one player struggling on the back end, and that is Richie Grant, who we lowered in the last episode of Studs and Duds. He is a really poor run defending safety. His play strength, the lack thereof, really shows when he arrives at the tackle point, when he arrives to take on a block. He just kind of ragdolls, and that is a problem for him. He also has been out of position in coverage. He's had an up and down start to his career, former second-round pick, but this might be the worst season of his 3-year career yet. And that's obviously not the direction you want to go. He did have an interception against Baker Mayfield, but he was just kind of the cloud coverage over the top of a kind of poorly timed route/throw from Baker. It wasn't really much of a had to do anything interception from Richie Grant, just to discuss that statistical note that he had being an interception and how lucky those can be. I do want to talk a little bit about Arnold Ebiketie. He's been playing well. He's a guy we expect a lot from. They rotate all these edge guys, though, so Ebiketie hasn't quite gotten the production or the sample size enough for me to feel good enough about boosting him quite yet. But if he continues his kind of current rate, even at 15, 20 snaps a game, I imagine in next month's Studs and Duds, we'll see a boost for Arnold Ebiketie. And then we've got the punter, Bradley Pinion, actually by a wide margin, PFF's highest graded punter in the National Football League. So the 8-year vet out of Clemson is making plays for the punt team. All right, next we have the San Francisco 49ers. Not a ton of movement from these few weeks, but the star of the month is going to be Talanoa Hufanga, who maybe isn't quite making as many impact plays, less interceptions falling in his lap. In fact, he hasn't even been quite as good as he was in coverage across the board last year, I would say, but making massive gains in run defense. He was more of a splash run defender last year. This year, he's just been a constant force, and his missed tackle rate has improved drastically. which is, I feel like, such an underrated aspect of the safety position, because if you're missing tackles from that spot, that's where you get explosive plays after the catch and in the run game. Last year, Hufanga, for all of the great things he did, he actually missed 18 tackles for a missed tackle percentage rate of 15%. This year, through 7 weeks, he's missed just one, 2.8% on his attempts. That's a massive improvement in terms of his physical presence on the game. But let's talk offense for a minute. You know, Brock Purdy, we raised him last week. He's had a couple of tough weeks in a row. The Vikings game was weird because he actually played well until potentially suffering a concussion, almost confirmed that that's what's happened, and then he threw 2 picks after the concussion. So I want to be a little bit more forgiving on that. And then the Browns game was tough in a week where mid-game they lose McCaffrey and Debo in bad weather against the best defense in football. Obviously, he could have played better, but still had the team in position to win late in that game. He's played much more like that 7th round. I don't even want to say that. Like, he's been fine. Not what he's been in the first 10 starts of his career, though. So I want to see him play better, obviously, moving forward. If he continues to struggle, we might have to have some different conversations about Brock Purdy. But he's been mostly good on the season. I didn't feel like lowering him. It didn't feel right. But I am taking note that he has not played his best football these last 2 weeks. But some other offensive players, Jordan Mason just continues to look good whenever he does get opportunities here. He ended up playing in that Dallas blowout, and then he played when McCaffrey went down against Cleveland. Ended up with 5.5 yards per carry and a nice touchdown in that game. He's made 5 defenders miss on just 21 carries. So, he looks the part. He's a big-bodied kind of speed, acceleration, size, kind of a speed train runner, if you will. So I don't know if he'll ever get a larger opportunity, but for how they use him, he's a nice piece. And then the left tackle, Jalen Moore, had to start in the Vikings game with Trent Williams out, and really held his own, played well in that game. He's been on this team for a couple of years, and looked the part of a solid backup, if nothing else. And then on the defensive side of the ball, a couple of these rotational defensive tackles have been pretty good from a pass rushing perspective. Kevin Givens is having the most efficient pass rushing year of his career. He's got some quickness. He's had a couple games now where he's made an impact as a pass rusher, so he's going to go up 1. And then how about Javon Kinlaw? Kind of getting in there for 15 snaps a game, getting a pressure or 2 every week. He's been a useful pass rusher, and he's probably never going to return dividends on the, whole trading away DeForest Buckner and then spending that first-round pick on him for the Niners. That ship has probably sailed, but that doesn't mean he can't be a useful rotational pass rusher for them. And, maybe he is maturing and figuring some things out. He does have all of the tools in the world. It's pretty unlikely that he's going to be back with the Niners one way or another, but, we'll continue to monitor if he's potentially having a late career breakout. I don't know. He's showing some of the good stuff that we liked about him coming out of college that made him a first-round pick. And then the kicker, remember, don't draft kickers in the 3rd round, no matter how good they were in college. Any of these kickers at any given point can get the yips. And we've seen that with Jake Moody here. A good start. We raised him in last week's episode or the last episode of Studs and Duds. Not so much. He has missed some big kicks in big spots, and just hopefully he can get things back to how they looked for the first month of the season. And that's all we got for the Niners. Next up, the New York Giants, who have actually given us something to talk about this time around, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where they've been much better. Offensively, their struggles have continued, though they've found some answers here with a couple of guys. Let's talk about our star of the month, Jalen Hyatt, getting a +4 here, the rookie receiver out of Tennessee. He's impressed me with some of his tough catches. I think it was that Bills game, late in the game, going over the middle of the field, taking some contact, making a big catch. And I tweeted out after that, I was like, if Jalen Hyatt is making those types of catches, he can play at the next level. And they've made him a bigger part of the offense. They've started to design deep shots to him just to find something for this offense. And he's converted a good amount of them. And this is a guy that third round, even though I was lower on Jalen Hyatt, third round was definitely good value to get him at. And some people viewed him as a potential first round type of wide receiver. So definitely looking like a steal in the draft, providing some explosiveness and it factor just somewhere on this offense that they've been so desperately looking for. But I think Tyrod Taylor has been a big part of that. He's got one less big-time throw in his 2.5 games of action here for the Giants than Daniel Jones had all of last season. And it's not just the ability to push the ball downfield. In fact, that's the biggest part of this that I think is opening this offense up at least a little bit, but also being able to manage the rush a little bit better than someone like Daniel Jones can. Daniel Jones can run, but he's got poor pocket presence and isn't exactly a shifty athlete. Tyrod, much more used to navigating pressure and getting out of a tough situation. And the combination of that and the actual willingness and ability to push the ball downfield has given this Giants offense a little bit of a sparkle of life. But it certainly is not all good for the offense. My guy, Isaiah Hodgins, unfortunately has not followed up his breakout season last year with a good year this year. They've tried to make him a part of the offense, but it just hasn't been there. He hasn't been able to really get open. He hasn't been making the impressive catches that he made last season. Just kind of an afterthought in this offense at this point in time. I think we do need to lower him and maybe pump the brakes a little bit from his breakout last season. And then on the offensive line, their struggles definitely continue, and you really hate to see what's happening with Evan Neal. I mean, you don't want to throw the bust label on a guy too quickly, but Evan Neal was viewed by myself and I think pretty much everybody as a borderline blue chip prospect. This was a no-brainer pick when they made it, and not only is he a lot worse in terms of his floor than I think we ever could have imagined based on how kind of dominant he was at Alabama, but there's just been no progress here. And there seems to be something broken in his mechanics. He just cannot get depth and protect the corner, and pass rushers are just teeing off on him right now. They're going through it, they're playing him through it, and it's really hurting this offense. And I still hope that the organization that turned Andrew Thomas into one of the premier tackles in the NFL can see similar gains from Evan Neal. I don't want to write a guy off. Look at guys like Bernard Raymond and Luke Goedeke. Progression is not linear for everybody, but it really is not looking good for Evan Neal, and he's got to come down again. He is nothing short of a liability for the New York Giants right now. And then the other offensive tackle, Matt Peart, he's a tradesy player. I liked him coming out as well and showed some flashes early on, but his inability to get on the field when it's just been, basically a assembly line of random offensive tackles given it their go at left tackle. Matt Peart got a crack, I think, in the Dolphins game and was just next in line to get worked and was horrible. So you combine his 25 bad snaps with the fact that he hasn't been able to carve out a role in this offensive line, and it does kind of feel like the ship has sailed on Matt Peart as well. Their development with these guys has got to come into question. They just can't seem to find any answers here. But let's talk about the defense, where, like I said, they've given us a lot more to talk about. They have really been one of the better defenses in the league over the last couple of weeks, and they're getting some big performances from these guys, stars and unknown players alike. But Dexter Lawrence has been the key to this whole thing. I mean, you just won't find a nose tackle playing at the level Dexter Lawrence has been playing at now for, 20 plus games. Was a monster last season, capped off by one of the better defensive performances you'll ever see in his game against the Minnesota Vikings. And he's followed it up this season as well, not just being that dominant, space-eating, block-shedding nose tackle up front, but he's just a better pass rusher than I think anybody ever expected, than I think even Dave Gettleman ever expected of him coming out of Clemson. It's just rare for a guy his size to have the quickness and it factor as a pass rusher that he has. He's a truly special player that, in a league with Chris Jones and Aaron Donald, I think it's gotten a little bit easy to lose sight of Dexter Lawrence, but he really has entered the kind of conversation for, I would say, like the 10 best defensive players in all of football. Now, it's not all good for this defense. They went and traded for Boogie Basham, a former second-round pick for the Buffalo Bills, someone that Joe Shane would have drafted here for the Bills, now the GM for the Giants. And to be fair, I don't think it's the best scheme fit. The Giants run a stand-up edge front, and Boogie Basham was always a bigger-bodied edge coming out. It's kind of an awkward position for him. Granted, a guy like Jihad Ward gets away with it, but Basham has not been able to get comfortable here. He actually has 0 pressures on the season on 39 pass rush snaps, and he's seen his snap count taper off since week 1. So he's going to come down. Maybe a 4-3 type of front could fit him better in a different spot, because he has had some good games as a pass rusher when he was in that type of system for the Bills. But then the linebackers, this has really been the story of this defense, in my opinion, is these two guys emerging. Bobby Okereke, their big free agent signing, he was a good player, but he just continues to get smarter and better at the position. He's a good run defender. He's a smart coverage player, a Stanford guy, a great athlete, just a really good starting linebacker playing at a good level. But Micah McFadden, the 5th-round rookie last year out of Illinois, was kind of a pass rush specialist linebacker that was going to have to learn the position a little bit, and he is taken to coaching here. And in his last 2 games, things have really clicked into place. He's been flying to the ball in run support. They continue to use him as a blitzer, 5 or 6 times a game, where he's getting a couple pressures every week. I mean, I think their ability to let him pin his ears back in, of course, this Wink Martindale system that loves to blitz their linebackers, their middle linebackers. I think it does inspire some confidence in his game, but he's even, improved in coverage and just all around has definitely rounded out his game and looks like he might turn into a decent complementary piece to Bobby Okereke. Okereke kind of the captain of the defense, the field general type, and McFadden kind of the high energy, rally to the ball, blitz a little bit type. It's a really fun duo these guys got right now, and I think it's only going to get better as we move forward. Then as you look towards the secondary here, some good, some bad. Cordell Slot, as he's known in New York, has been starting in the slot since week 4, and he's been all right. I think he's improved his tackling a little bit. He's cut his missed tackle rate in half. Kind of put himself on the map a little bit with a really nice pass breakup against Miami, and he's seen his snap count skyrocket since that Dolphins game. So I think for now he's their starting slot corner, and they spent a 3rd-round pick on him, and he's an interesting guy that was a young player coming out of LSU in year 2, kind of this weird, lanky, 6'1" slot corner, just kind of a unique type of profile. Usually these lanky 6'1" guys are more perimeter players, but he always was a slot guy at LSU and is obviously comfortable doing that here for the Giants. So he's a fun player. We'll see how he can do the rest of the year. And then Trey Hawkins was kind of the camp hype guy for the Giants. It hasn't returned dividends based on how much this guy was getting hyped up as a super athlete out of, I think, Old Dominion, undrafted rookie. Of course, you're going to get the fans to buy in when you make a couple plays in camp. He has been starting, though, for what it's worth, and he's been very up and down. I'm definitely not sold on him, but he's a tradesy player, and if he can kind of stick with it and avoid getting benched here, I think maybe he could be climbing towards something. So he's another fascinating player to kind of monitor here. But Adoree Jackson has really struggled. He's been a very up and down player throughout his career. Looks like he's heading towards a down year here this year after a good year last year. They've been able to kind of target him as if he's Joe Schmo out there. He's given up a lot of receptions, a lot of yards this year. And then Jason Pinnock, who won this starting safety job opposite of Xavier McKinney, has been okay in run support, practical in coverage, though nothing special. He's going to get a +1 from a 68 to a 69. So, they're sorting through this secondary. It's not a great group, but they've got some young players that they're trying out. Now, we do got to talk about Deonte Banks, who's not going to go up because those that have been around this channel know I freaking love Deonte Banks. I've got him rated as a 75 rookie, which is a very good mark, and I would say he's lived up to that. Not quite ready to raise him yet because he's been very polarizing. He's given up a couple big plays. He's had a couple big penalties when targeted deep, but he's also had some beautiful interceptions and some good games in coverage too. So his interception last week against Sam Howell, where he showed those zone eyes that I loved about him coming out, kind of breaking back on the ball. I think that interception has kind of put him on a lot of people's radar. I've seen a lot of Deonte Banks talk on the Twitter sphere or the X sphere this week. It's been fun to see him get his dues. But again, I was high on him coming in. I'm not surprised to see him playing pretty well for a rookie corner. I don't think he's exceeded my expectations quite yet, though. And then the kicker, Graham Gano, has had a rough month. No way around it. He's missed, I think, 3 field goals in this stretch, so he's going to come down. Then we've got the Detroit Lions, and it was honestly a little tough to pick a star of the month. I feel like a bunch of different dudes are stepping up, playing well, staying hot, kind of building the real core of this team. I'm going to stick with Aiden Hutchinson, who, granted, the last couple of weeks has cooled off slightly, but you look at what he did in that Panthers game, just taking over. I mean, he has, 8 pressures, a sack, and that instinctive interception against the screen. It feels like Hutchinson not only has turned into this great pass rusher, but that's only adding on top of what he's already shown us in the NFL, where he has this rare instincts, almost like TJ Watt-esque in terms of just playmaking outside of the pass rushing element of things. But yeah, Hutchinson just continues to climb towards being one of these top echelon pass rushers. What a second season it's been for the Michigan man. But let's talk about the offense a little bit. Jared Goff, I've been really pumping him up the last couple of weeks. You look at what he did in that Panthers game and the Bucs game, just making really tough throws on third down. I was saying, man, he feels a little bit closer to that kind of tier 2 of quarterbacks this season, where you might put like maybe Herbert, for example. And then the Ravens game happened, and it's not that he was horrible, but you did feel that kind of typical Jared Goff lack of elevation when the offense didn't have answers. Goff is not a quarterback that couldn't really improvise a ton and provide some of those answers. So maybe a slight pump the brakes from that Ravens game probably would have been a +2 if we did this after week 6, perhaps. But either way, he deserves his credit. He's really just playing so comfortable within this offense that he's just been able to be a part of, obviously, for 3 years now, and he's protecting the football. You keep waiting for him to have a real stinker of a game, and even though he didn't elevate and have this great game against the Ravens, he didn't even lay a stinker when he was under pressure all day. So I'm not really worried about the Ravens game necessarily. He definitely deserves his credit, and it's been a really fun ascension where, last year by the end of the year, we were saying, Jared Goff is as good as Dak Prescott and Kirk Cousins. He does belong in that tier. And now it's like he doesn't just belong in that tier, but he is probably at the top of that tier and is pushing the next tier up of these kind of great quarterbacks. This is the former number 1 overall pick, and even if he doesn't have the athleticism to improvise, if he keeps avoiding mistakes and having huge games like he's had, you're allowed a stinker like a game against the Ravens. If he keeps putting up games like he did against Tampa and Carolina week in, week out, he's gonna keep climbing and continue to reshape how we feel about Jared Goff. And then these wide receivers are helping him out. Josh Reynolds continues to just be a mainstay, kind of possession, big-bodied receiver, making some tough catches. He's just reliable. He's not the best separator in the world or anything like that, but he's got a good chemistry with Jared Goff. He presents a big target, and if given an accurate pass, he's probably going to come down with that thing more often than not. And then Khalif Raymond as well. I mean, how often does it feel like these 5'8" receivers just aren't reliable or a consistent part of the offense? Raymond, week in, week out, is like, hey, yeah, I'm here. I'm going to get you 4 catches for 40 yards. You can scheme up some deep shots for me because I've got speed. If I'm open, I'll catch it. Raymond just doesn't drop the ball. And yeah, he's a good receiver going up again here this week. I do want to talk real quick about Jameson Williams. He's made some big plays, but also 4 drops in his 3 games since coming off the suspension. The polarizing receiver stays polarizing. I'll just say that. But let's talk about this offensive line a little bit. Graham Glasgow, what a critical pickup he's been. All of their starting guards, both Hal Vaitai and Jonah Jackson, have dealt with some injuries, and Graham Glasgow has shown, hey, you can put me at right guard, you can put me at left guard. He's got some experience playing center in his career. He might be the best 6th man on an interior of an offensive line in the NFL right now. He obviously had some down years with the Denver Broncos after leaving Detroit on that big free agent contract, but he is back at home and kind of looks like the old Graham Glasgow a little bit. So he's been a huge luxury. I wouldn't be stunned if they decide, if and when both Jonah Jackson and Hal Vaitai are healthy, I wouldn't be stunned if they decide that Graham Glasgow is just the better option between either of those players. They're all kind of in the same tier to me of quality starting offensive guards at this point. And then the right tackle, Penei Sewell, I actually thought about him for star of the month as well. He's just been a complete rock star. Everything we thought about him as a blue chip offensive tackle prospect has come to life, unlike Evan Neal, who we just talked about. Penei Sewell also had some, I don't want to say question marks, but like his pass protection technique was far from perfect coming out, but it is getting closer and closer to perfect. He's right there in the conversation for the best right tackles in the NFL. And as we talked about in last Studs and Duds, he can kick over to left too. So he's just phenomenal. What a perfect draft pick he's been for them. And then even Coyote Awosika got a start against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and held up okay at left guard. Good to know they have even more depth on the interior of that incredible offensive line. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of these defensive players. Aleem McNeil continues to climb. Love him shedding weight. Just being a good two-way defensive player, can get after it as a pass rusher. He's put another 8 pressures on the board in his last 3 games here in this week's 5 to 7 stretch, but also just some dominant run defense efforts as well. He was also unbelievable against the Carolina Panthers. You'll be hard-pressed to find a pair of defensive players with as dominant of a day as both Aleem McNeil and Aiden Hutchinson had against that Panthers defensive line. So these guys, really a nice 1-2 punch. They just wish a couple other guys could step up on that D-line a little bit, which I think was felt in the Ravens game quite a bit. But Alex Anzalone continues to play well. He's always been a presence as a run defender, has always kind of been an inconsistent tackler. I think he's taken a slight step up in terms of his ability to read his keys in this defense and be a run defender. But what you're really noticing with Alex Anzalone is how consistent he's been as a third down linebacker too in coverage. And it's something I noticed prepping for the Lions deep dive was like, you know what? Alex Anzalone actually kind of flows in his coverage pretty well. It didn't result in good coverage grades last year, but this time it is. He's really getting in the way of some passing lanes. He's broken up 4 passes this year, which is a really good number for a linebacker. He had 2 against Baker Mayfield and the Bucs. So he just continues to impress, and his head and mind for the game is really impressive. And he's got length and athleticism to complement it. So A lot of people, myself included, and a lot of Lions fans kind of scoffed when they gave him a 3-year, $18 million contract or something along those lines. And he's a bargain at this point with how he's played in the first half of the season. I don't think he's going to slow down either. He's kind of got it all. And then the cornerback, Jerry Jacobs, has had to step up with all of these injuries in the secondary. Big-bodied, undrafted rookie out of Arkansas a couple years ago. He's held up pretty well. And they missed him in that game against the Ravens. He wasn't out there, and those corners struggled. So he's been playing like a quality starter for them in year 3 here. Really 3 straight good starts for him. So a +3 for Jerry Jacobs. Okay, next up we have the Green Bay Packers, whose star of the month is going to be last year's street free agent pickup, Rudy Ford, who really has just shown that he can play, man. He's been a special teamer, a late round kind of freak athlete out of Auburn who wasn't much in college. He's played some slot corner throughout his career, but has really settled in as a safety in this Joe Barry hybrid quarters happy system. Insert every single comment I've ever made about players with slot corner experience thriving in these types of systems, and he's really found a good fit. He's got a good nose for the ball to kind of read and react to route combinations and to read the quarterback's eyes from those cover 4 assignments. But his experience playing special teams for the first 5 years in his career has really shown too in his ability to come downfield and tackle and rally and be that last line of defense. They really have found a nice player here in the 29-year-old. Wouldn't be surprised if he gets a nice extension here in Green Bay with how he's playing right now. He's had a couple of big interceptions for this team too. He really has been a pleasant surprise since he came in as that street free agent. He was all right for the Jags, too, the year before that as well. But let's talk about the offense. Quarterback Jordan Love taking a U-turn in these last 3 weeks, showing much more signs for pause and concern. Even, in both the Raiders game on Monday Night Football and the Broncos game this last week, it really is just 2 defining weaknesses right now that are holding him back. And number one is the accuracy that just continues to show up 3+ times a game, whether he's overthrowing a deep ball or leaving it behind his receivers over the middle of the field, or whatever, wherever it may be. He just does struggle to command the football. And then what has been potentially even more concerning, both are concerning, I think, but has been the head-scratching mistakes once or twice a week. Now he's kind of, putting the ball in harm's way, making questionable reads and just dumb decisions with the football. I mean, the interception late against the Broncos, chucking it up deep into double coverage was not a good one. Threw it straight to a linebacker in the Raiders game. Just not seeing the field as well as he maybe did weeks 2 or 3. I don't think it's been all bad for Jordan Love. I still don't think he needs to be written off quite yet. But like I said, there's definitely some causes for concern. And until he can improve his accuracy and or stop throwing the ball to the defense once or twice a week, he's just not going to have a very high ceiling as a quarterback for the Packers. Now, some struggles on the offense haven't been all him. These wide receivers are not stepping up. Nobody's going up. And Romeo Doubs is also going to take a U-turn after being bumped up in weeks 1 through 4. The drops issues are back for Romeo Doubs, and it's a trade-off when you have a guy that makes such a diligent effort to be a hands catcher, where he's going to extend his hands and pluck the ball. It sounds silly. You'd think every wide receiver does that, but it's not the case. A lot of wide receivers will catch the ball with their chest when they feel it's appropriate. Romeo Doubs really wants to be a hands catcher all the time, and it leads to some really nice catches. It leads to his ability to go, pluck the ball away from a Patrick Surtain for a nice contested catch touchdown. That was controversial, but needless to say, it was a nice play by Romeo Doubs. But, later in that game, he has a touchdown go right through his hands that could have been a disaster for Green Bay. It ends up ricocheting into the hands of Jaden Reed, who was fortunately paying attention. But, drops were an issue for Doubs in his rookie season. 2 big drops now in back-to-back weeks. And I think you also got to put Christian Watson on notice to potentially go down as well. Just has not been good really since he came back from the injury. Just not winning tough catches with his size. Jordan Love puts a lot of trust in him, and Watson looking more like the version that we were concerned about of him out of North Dakota State, where he's 6'4", but doesn't really have these great ball skills. He showed some of those off in his rookie year, but none of that has really been there this year. Not to mention he ruined a drive by running the wrong route on a pretty basic concept, got his ass chewed out on the sideline by Matt LaFleur. So I'm not going to drop him from his 77 spot quite yet, but he is on watch. And then some shuffling up with the offensive line. Some guys playing better than others. Zach Tom just continues to impress, the 4th round pick here in year 2. We've spent a lot of time talking about Zach Tom throughout the course of this series, going back to last season. He truly was one of the steals of the draft at the time during the draft, and certainly now a year and a half into his career. And he's come along and improved his run blocking this year as well. And then Josh Myers has had a good couple of weeks here, not against the best pass rushes in Denver and Las Vegas, but has been holding it down as a pass protector. He's going to go up +1. But Elton Jenkins, on the other hand, is going to come down, just has not been that, premium left guard that they paid a premium for. He had a horrible pass rush loss at a really poor time. That kind of game-ending interception against the Raiders. Elton Jenkins got beat immediately in that spot. Jordan Love had to flush out of the pocket. He ends up chucking it up to Christian Watson for the interception. But it's not just that play. He just has not been as efficient as we've known Elton Jenkins to be. Hasn't been the run blocker that we've known him to be. It's time he comes down. And then over to the defensive side of the ball, Kenny Clark as well has got to come down. He's been a very streaky player over the last few years. He's definitely on a cold streak right now, probably the worst play of his career right now. Now, keep in mind, he always has his best games against the Minnesota Vikings, interdivision there, so I wouldn't be surprised if he bounces back in a big way tomorrow. But the other defensive tackle here, Devontae Wyatt, looks the part, man, and just continues to beg the question of why did Joe Barry not use him more in his rookie season? He was a 24-year-old rookie coming into the league with a pretty polished pass rushing skill set, and he's been getting starting reps and has really been a presence, especially as a pass rusher. Now, run defense has been a problem for him. It wasn't a strength for him at Georgia. But he really is showing off his quickness. He's got that cross chop that he showed off at the Senior Bowl. Coming out, and then just the get off and ability to work around offensive tackles has been there. He's got 19 pressures, 3 sacks on just 102 pass rush snaps this season. And then their rotational nose tackle, Tadaro or TJ Slayton. I'm not sure which one he prefers to go by at this point, but he continues to just hold it down as kind of the one guy that wants to play run defense between these defensive tackles. The one big-bodied guy that can play the nose and thump. He's a nice guy to have when they're able to use him. He's kind of a one-dimensional player, but he's good for what he does. And then off the edge, Preston Smith just continues to not offer a whole lot for Green Bay right now as a pass rusher. Just 13 pressures on the season. Granted, he has had a couple sacks the last couple of weeks that have kind of salvaged some statistical output for him, but in terms of down in, down out consistency for him, he's just not winning his one-on-one reps really at all. He's been kind of a contain rusher at best, and he's just not giving them the presence in terms of actually winning reps and pressuring the quarterback that he has over the last 3 years or so. So got to come down again for Preston Smith. And then into the secondary, Rasul Douglas also just continues to ball out, man. He has reached kind of an elite level in terms of just his IQ at the position, his ability to play in this zone-heavy defense and read out route combinations, read the quarterback's eyes, anticipate things. He's honestly been one of the better corners in the National Football League this season, and it's the scheme fit. He's like the one player on this Joe Barry defense where the scheme actually benefits. Maybe Rudy Ford as well. But for what it's worth, Rasul Douglas definitely, like I said, benefits. I mean, he has 5 pass breakups on the season, an interception. He's allowed just 191 yards in coverage on 18 receptions, and is balling out. So gonna come up into the 80s now. And then the punter, Daniel Whalen. We boosted him in last Studs and Duds. He's gonna go up again. I think he's 4th in hang time in the NFL. He's the 6th highest graded punter per PFF. And yeah, he just, the Irish Hammer has been a great find for Green Bay out of UC Davis, and maybe the best punter they've had in a long time for the Green Bay Packers. And it's coming at a good time because they've been punting a lot more than they're used to with the way this offense is playing these days. And then the Carolina Panthers, really not much to report at all. They've had a bye week in there, and then it's really just, I mean, there's been a lot of players that are bad that you expect to play bad that have been playing bad, that there's no reason to make them any worse than they already are in terms of their rating. It hasn't been all bad, though. The offense has figured out a few things. I think Bryce Young has played at least well enough to stop his slide the last couple of games. And Adam Thielen's emergence has been a big part of that. I mean, he's got double-digit receptions, over 100 yards in both of his last 2 performances. They've figured out, hey, let's just throw to the guy that we paid here that has tons of experience and is at least a competent wide receiver here. And he is producing at a really high level. But I will say he's actually separating over the middle of the field, maybe even more than he was doing for Minnesota. He had really gotten lost in the shuffle in the last couple of years there, obviously with Jefferson breaking out, but, Hawkinson coming in, being very present in the middle of the field there. KJ Osborne attacks the middle of the field. So, getting back to Carolina, doing what Adam Thielen can really do well at this stage in his career, and that is running those crossers, break off an in-breaking route, run a slant, work the sideline a little bit. He's just been a very solid option for them, and I don't think this is going to slow down anytime soon because no one else is really stepping up in this receiving game other than, I guess, maybe Tommy Tremble showing some flashes in the receiving game, I guess. But it is nice. The offensive line, I'm curious to see what this looks like coming off the bye week because not only do they get Austin Corbett back finally, because those guards have been brutal for Carolina, but Ikem Ekwonu has really settled in. I mean, he had a couple of real rough starts early in the season against Seattle and New Orleans, and we dropped him in the first episode of Studs and Duds. But the last 3 weeks, you go back to week 4 against the Vikings, and then against both Detroit and Miami, looking much more like rookie Ikem Ekwonu, which was a very solid pass protector, and he's actually been good the last few weeks. So they definitely want to see Ikem Ekwonu, their first-round pick from last year, heading in this direction, not the direction he was heading in September. And then Shy Tuttle, looking like a bit of an overpay right now. This was an undrafted kind of breakout out of nowhere for New Orleans over the last few years. Did a really good job defending the run in New Orleans and their system. Definitely hasn't translated in Carolina right now. And I don't know if it's necessarily system or if he took his money and isn't quite giving it the effort on a losing team as he did in New Orleans. I don't want to speculate, but the production has not been there. Not just his whole career, he's never been able to get after the quarterback. It's been kind of laughable. This is a player that has just 23 pressures over the last 3 seasons combined on about 700 pass rush snaps. You won't see a pressure rate much lower than that. Just 6 career sacks for Shy Tuttle. But this year, it has been the same. Just 1 pressure on the entire season on 94 pass rush snaps, which is just hysterical. But they paid him to be a sound run defender up front, and he hasn't even been doing that. Just 7 defensive stops on the season. He's got a couple of missed tackles. Not grading out well. This signing has not looked good for Carolina, whose front office, I would say, just continues to kind of beg some questions on if they're equipped enough to build a competitive roster here in Carolina. They've made a lot of mistakes. And this looks like it might be one of them. Then we have the LA Rams, and their star of the month is going to be year 2 running back Kyren Williams out of Notre Dame. And man, if you could just put this guy in like Antonio Gibson's body, you would end up with like maybe Walter Payton. I don't know, dumb analogy, but you get the point. This is an incredibly gritty, tough, instinctive runner. You see him fighting for tough yardage, showing the good vision, showing the good patience, the burst and confidence to hit a hole when he sees it. It's just, he's 5'9", 194, and he's not very fast. So it just makes it all the more impressive. But the Rams' run game has been shockingly good this year. Their offensive line's doing a good job up front, but Kyren Williams has been a big part of that as well. He's got over 3 yards after contact. He's made 20 defenders miss. Just been a very pleasant surprise. And then likewise, what about Royce Freeman? Breaking out at 27 years old, finally? What's the saying? Never wrong, just early? Well, for those that played fantasy football back in 2018, 2019, Freeman was a talented third-round pick out of Oregon that people always kind of expected to break out in Denver, and it never happened. He's bounced around. He's been in Carolina, Houston, and then with the Rams here. But a really impressive outing in Week 7 against the Pittsburgh Steelers with Kyren Williams out and this team kind of searching for options. And he comes out 5.5 yards a carry, 66 yards, 4 missed tackles forced, 4 yards after contact, showing some toughness, looking pretty good. So, you know, he's got some tools. He doesn't have a lot of tread worn off the tire either. Just 406 career carries, so we'll see. We'll see if there's something here late in his career. But then Puka Nacua, man, just continuing to impress. The game speed, just so impressive with him. You watch him break in and out of his routes and shaking defenders and peeling away from defenders on crossing routes and with the ball in his hands after the catch. The ability to separate deep and just come down with tough catches. It's just everything is so good with Puka Nacua. Since Cooper Kupp's come back, he's proven that he can play inside and out. He's shown that he can coexist with Cooper Kupp. This isn't just a guy that's going to be Cooper Kupp's backup. Just so impressive, man. You could have gone Puka for star of the month as well. He has had a couple drops in there. Not that I'm worried about it, but yeah, he's just freaking awesome, man. He's been kind of the breakout player of the NFL if you can break out as a rookie. I think it's more justified when you're a 5th round pick or whatever he was. But then on the offensive line, Rob Havenstein's having a really nice year here, 31 years old. He's really mashing dudes in the run game. He's also held up well in some tough matchups in the Eagles game and the Pittsburgh Steelers game. Held up all right against some tough matchups. So he's going to go up. And then Steve Avila, who was essentially a first-round pick for the Rams. He's like the 34th pick in the draft, the first interior offensive lineman off the board, other than Peter Skoronski, I suppose. Yeah, he's held up. He's kind of looked like Steve Avila. I thought he was a really high floor player, not necessarily high ceiling. We'll see if I'm wrong about the ceiling aspect of things, but his floor as a rookie guard has been very impressive. Not everyone steps in and kind of holds their own. Some tough reps against the Eagles and those guys, but overall in the course of the season, he's been perfectly fine as a starting option at guard for them. Now, Coleman Shelton, on the other hand, who we did boost in the last episode of Studs and Duds, is going to take a U-turn here. He came right back around and had some really rough pass blocking performances in some of those tough matchups that they've had, having to go against the Steelers and the Eagles in this stretch. And then I do want to talk a little bit about Kevin Dotson. He has been excellent. Strangely enough, he's been better as a run blocker than he has as a pass blocker. That was always kind of the thing in Pittsburgh, was like, this dude just does not grade out well as a run blocker, but has always been just a rock in pass protection. Needless to say, though, he was kind of like the best available backup offensive lineman that was available during camp. The Rams pulled the trigger on him, and I thought that was a brilliant move. They didn't start him out the gate, but over the last 4 weeks, they've put him in there at right guard, and they do not regret their decision. So I would say he's lived up to the kind of, I guess, standard that you would expect, that he is a really quality starting guard. I don't know why the Steelers necessarily didn't like him. And maybe he's kind of playing a little pissed off because his run blocking grade is insane right now. It's in the 90s per PFF. Not that that's gospel or anything, but he's been in the 50s and 60s his whole career. The only reason he's not going up is because he didn't have the best day in pass protection against the Steelers. But maybe he's just kind of reshaping what we think about him. I just want to collect a little bit more information on Kevin Dotson before I adjust his ratings, but he's playing really well at right guard, as you would have hoped. So I wanted to talk about him. He's rated up there as a 78, which is, one of the better right guards in the league. But let's talk about the defense. A lot of these, young, experimental players, if you will, are playing pretty well. Bobby Brown is a year 3 defensive tackle, a mid-round pick out of Texas A&M. He's had a slow start to his career, but that was kind of expected. He was a traits-based, kind of developmental young prospect that I always said looked the part. Like if you just, put him next to Kenny Clark and just said, who's Bobby Brown, who's Kenny Clark, and put them in the same jersey, you'd have a hard time discerning. Like he is built and looks like an NFL defensive tackle. But he's dealt with some injuries, and just being a young defensive tackle hasn't been much of a player for the Rams yet. But in the last couple of weeks, he's been out there really defending the run well, a pair of defensive stops in each of his last 2 games. And what's really important here is he's the one guy that they have on the interior that actually provides some beef, that kind of Sebastian Joseph Day role in this defense, if you will. So he's the one that's actually playing some nose tackle, and that makes it even harder for him to play well. So he's only 23 years old in year 3 here. I mean, if he's starting to figure things out, that's just yet another asset for this Rams team that's been such a pleasant surprise this year. But some of these rookies too, Kobe Turner, the hybrid undersized guy they take a gamble on, he's splashing into the backfield, making some plays against the run. Pass rush as well. He's shown up from time to time. He's a decent, I would say, third piece to have for them. I don't know if he's a 2 necessarily. Maybe he can continue to get better and prove that he is. But they use him well inside this system, and he's a nice player. And then Byron Young as well, their 3rd round pick out of Tennessee, the freak athlete who ran a 4.4, who's got a very fascinating backstory, was working at a dollar store before going back to football. As a 25-year-old prospect here. But he's showing some flashes of pass rush moves. He's got pretty impressive 28 pressures, 4 sacks on the season. Now, some of those pressures are a product of Aaron Donald. I don't mean this as a knock on Byron Young. This is a part of what always made Leonard Floyd such a productive player here is Donald is such a disruptive player, and he gets in so quickly. He does force the quarterback to move off his spot. So when you have these freaks like Leonard Floyd and Byron Young who have insane pursuit speed, and you have to be a guy like Byron Young who is tenacious and gets after it, you're going to register some pressures and some sacks as the quarterbacks kind of roll your way. So it's a really nice fit here. And then he's putting on top of that, occasionally winning with some pass rush moves. But to put that in perspective, he's 14th in the NFL out of 113 eligible players in pressures, but 67th in pass rush win rate. So just some stats to kind of support that a little bit more. But it's a good fit, right? We've seen this kind of duo with a Donald and Leonard Floyd have success in the past, and they've found a like-bodied, like-minded player. It's a good fit. And then Russ Yeast continues to start on the back end, and he's not really getting cooked. He's missed some tackles. He's not a perfect player, but getting those starting reps and not sucking is valuable for them. So he's going to go up. And then the special teamers, Brett Maher, gonna drop down 3 here before getting released by the LA Rams. Kind of cost them that Steelers game, basically. Left 7 points on the board. Got the yips. Their free agent signing from Dallas. But their rookie punter, Ethan Evans, out of like Colgate or something, has been a pretty league average to above average punter. So he's going to get a +4. And then we have the New Orleans Saints, and for their star of the month, I'm going to go with edge player Carl Granderson, who's definitely having a breakout season, at least in terms of public perception. You know, those that have followed this series over the years are probably aware of Carl Granderson because he's been a nice role player for the Saints, but again, really just forced Marcus Davenport out of town and has become their true, almost number one edge rusher, honestly. Either him or Cam Jordan, both, you know, good players, but Granderson right now, who again has always been a good run defender here, actually leads the NFL in defensive stops against the run right now. He is a menace up front with his length and tenacity and size, and then starting to put together even more pass rush production this season as well. He's well worth the extension that they paid him, and if you don't know who Carl Granderson is yet, pay attention the next time you watch a Saints game. He's one of their, I mean, they got a lot of good defensive players, but he's one of their better ones, especially this season. But let's talk a little bit about the offense. Kendre Miller, I think, passed the eye test in that Patriots game, catching the ball out of the backfield, showing a lot of juice, even a little bit more juice than I thought he had in the tank. So I know it's Alvin Kamara's backfield at the moment, but I do think Kendre Miller, whenever the keys are passed to him, at least showed me some impressive physical tools and some nice natural ability in the receiving game that you could potentially get rather excited about him if he does get that opportunity down the road. But on the offensive line, some of these guys are playing much better as of late. Cesar Ruiz and Trevor Penning. And this was tough because both of these guys really struggled in that Houston Texans game. Cesar Ruiz especially was just horrible. But 2 of the last 3 weeks, these guys have actually played really well. So you're kind of hoping that that Texans game was a bit of an anomaly, at least in terms of these guys, you know, having some nice games. I'm not the biggest Ruiz guy. I'm not the biggest Trevor Penning guy, but you know, again, outside of that Texans game, they have actually held up pretty well. But then back to the defensive side of the ball, one of my dudes on this defense, Malcolm Roach, kind of fighting for reps, but continuing to do what he's done since he's arrived in New Orleans as an undrafted pickup out of Texas. Just being a nice rotational run defending 3 technique. He's really good with his hands, can get off blocks, quick feet. Hasn't really come along in terms of any sort of pass rushing ability, and that's kind of limited his role, but he's nice within that role at least. And then talk about a role player, Zach Bond. The Saints are finally using Zach Bond. This is a contract year for him. He was a 3rd-round pick out of Wisconsin in 2020. One of these kind of hybrid Wisconsin outside backers. We've seen several of these players have success, the Andrew Van Ginkel types of the world, out of Wisconsin specifically. And this year, they've kind of tapped into the correct way to use Zach Bond. He's got 105 snaps on the season, which is already more than he had all of last year. His career high is 194 snaps. So he's well on pace to play more than he's ever played. But yeah, they're using him in certain packages and different downs. He's got 50 run defense snaps. He has 26 pass rushing snaps, kind of off the edge, which is what he played at Wisconsin at 6'3", 225 pounds. So, you know, he's kind of that tweener linebacker type. And then another 29 reps in coverage where he's been pretty solid, getting into his hot spot drops. Even had a nice interception against CJ Stroud that he then turned around and fumbled back to the offense. But yeah, Zach Bond doing some fun stuff. I'm happy to see him get used because I've always felt like he's a talented player. They just haven't really been able to tap into his skill set until now, apparently. But then back into the secondary, Jordan Howden has had to step in as a safety for the Saints. Got 2 starts, one against Green Bay and then another the next week against New England, where he really impressed. Ended up with 2 pass breakups in that game. He's looked the part, a 5th-round pick out of Minnesota who tested really well. He's got the size. This was kind of a deep, weird safety class, and Howden was just another piece in that, but I always felt like he could accomplish better things with different coaching because he was never bad at Minnesota. He was a good tackler. He didn't give up a lot in coverage. He just didn't make a lot of plays, but they seem to have found something in Howden, and he looks the part, and this team has an eye for the secondary for sure. So he'll be an interesting player to monitor, especially as Marcus May has actually struggled this season quite a bit, and maybe it's a case of the injuries just starting to catch up with him. He's missed games this season. He's missed games really every year for the last 3 years. But a rough day of coverage against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Targeted 5 times back there for 57 yards. Kind of easy pickings for Trevor Lawrence when targeting Marcus May. He's also having a career high in missed tackles and missed tackle rate. He's at 25% missed tackles. He's never been over 13 in his career, so that's like double his career there. Even more perspective there, he has 6 missed tackles on the season. The last 2 years, he had 5 and 6 missed tackles. So approaching 30 years old, it does seem like Marcus May's best football might be behind him. And I wonder, with Howden playing well and May struggling recently, especially in that Thursday night game against the Jags, do they maybe consider a switch here? I don't know. It'd be a little bit bold, but it might be better for them, especially in the long run. Something to keep an eye on. Then we have the Seattle Seahawks, who last week had, I think, a historic amount of players in need of adjustment. Not anything too crazy in terms of raw numbers this week, but definitely some big performers for the Seahawks, who have been some much-needed assets for this team. And none bigger, really, than Devin Witherspoon, their top draft pick, everyone's favorite corner. I mean, you see a guy that is not just as sticky in coverage as he is. It drew a lot of kind of Jair Alexander comps with his fluid hips and ability to snap onto routes, and he's been that in coverage. But on top of that, to see a guy that's not the biggest corner in the world play as physical and aggressive as he does, it's just so fun. I mean, you see him come downfield and really hit guys and kind of provide a spark for this defense. He's been every single bit as good as advertised and some. And I know Jalen Carter got the hot start as Devon Witherspoon missed the first week of the season, but, and this isn't a slight at Jalen Carter, it's a credit to how well Devin Witherspoon is playing. I mean, Carter's been one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL this year, but Witherspoon's been one of the best corners in the NFL, and we saw Sauce Gardner win Defensive Rookie of the Year last year as well. So, he's been every single bit worth that high pick that they spent on him. But then on the offensive side of the ball, how about Jake Bobo making lots of noise in Seahawks Nation, the undrafted pickup out of UCLA who infamously ran a 4.99 40 in a monsoon, mind you. He ain't that slow, people. He's been actually getting involved much more in the last couple of weeks in the receiving game. DK Metcalf misses that game against the Cardinals, and Bobo steps up. 4 receptions for 61 yards, including a beautiful toe-tapping touchdown, showing the catch radius, showing the body control. I mean, he keeps climbing, man, and he keeps run blocking at this incredible level. That's why he's getting on the field in the first place. In fact, he outsnapped Jackson Smith and Jigba in a week where DK Metcalf wasn't playing. But that doesn't mean JSN himself is not playing well. I dropped him last week after he had a couple drops himself and was struggling to be that day one impact, at least in terms of a literal day one impact. But he has been a year one impact in the last couple of weeks. And it started with that Bengals game where he was open time and time again, and they threw him the ball, but not as much as they could have. And then the Cardinals game rolls around. They saw on film, hey, JSN's running good routes. He's getting open underneath. He's finding the soft spots and zones, just as he did at Ohio State, honestly. Let's get him involved here. And with no Metcalf out there, he leads the team in targets with 7, converts it into, 4 receptions, 63 yards, gets the touchdown, does, however, register 2 drops. So that's now 4 on the season to just 30 targets. That's not ideal. It's not necessarily something that showed up on his college tape. Maybe the wrist is bothering him, but if if not for the drops, he'd be shooting up even more. I think he looks the part, but, got to hit the jugs machine. Got to stop dropping the football. And then Phil Haynes, who we boosted last episode, is going to come down. Now, to be fair, I think he's dealing with an injury, so I don't want to overreact here. But, he had a bad 5 snaps against the Giants before coming out of the game. And then after the bye week, he starts against the Cincinnati Bengals at left guard and was a problem for their offense. Guys like Cam Sample were just spinning him around. So he's going to lose the one rating point that we gave him in the last episode. We'll see how he does the rest of the year. And then a couple other defenders continuing to climb, staying hot here. Boye Mafe, who, man, they needed one of these edge guys to step up, and Mafe looks like he's prepped to do it. He leads the team in pressures with 19, 4 sacks on the season, and he's looking pretty good in run defense. So he's been a good two-way player, a 3-down edge for them. They spent that high second-round pick on him, and it looks like year 2 of his development is heading in the right direction, which they are very happy to see. And then the corner, Trey Brown. I love Trey Brown, man. He's a scrappy, undersized corner that actually is better on the outside, is pretty good in press man coverage. His performance against the Bengals was sensational. The Bengals were moving the ball in the first half, and then in the second half, they thought they could test Trey Brown with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and a couple of big third downs. Trey Brown got a pass breakup and then an interception where he gets his head around, just looks the part. They're finding ways to get him on the field because, Jamal Adams is back. They run kind of a 3-safety base right now with Julian Love and Quandre Diggs. And then they, of course, have Devon Witherspoon and Tariq Woolen. So they're trying to get Trey Brown in dime packages when they can. They'll put him on the outside with Witherspoon in the slot. And he's been pretty much locked down out there. So limited opportunities, but I do think he's a player and deserves his credit. And then our final team, the Minnesota Vikings. It's been a fun few weeks for the Vikings. This team definitely bouncing back, and their star of the month is none other than the receiver stepping up as their wide receiver 1 in the place of Justin Jefferson. First round rookie Jordan Addison out of USC. The Chiefs game, the Bears game, he was all right, seeing some targets and getting involved. But, man, that Niners game, he took over the deep ball touchdown before half on Charvarius Ward. Reminiscent of some of the stuff he did at USC, even reminiscent of some of the stuff he did at Pitt before that. Super talented player, well-deserving of going in the first round. And definitely good to see him stepping up. And it's so encouraging because Justin Jefferson is coming back. Like, you see him kind of getting out-muscled on a slant route against Charvarius Ward. The interception ripped away from him, for example. There are deficiencies in his game, but you can stay away from plays like that when you have someone like Justin Jefferson that you can force a slant to on a difficult down, right? Addison can just thrive on what he's shown he can do in just a couple weeks when Jefferson comes back. So it's just been really good to see what he can do. And then another wide receiver stepping up too, Brandon Powell, who's basically just been a punt returner throughout his career, but he's had to kind of start as their slot wide receiver. He's seen a few targets, converting some yards. He's been all right stepping in. And then on the offensive line, this group really having a good season, especially it feels like since Darrisaw here came back, and I don't think it's a coincidence. Christian Darrisaw really is, whenever he plays, one of the best left tackles and overall tackles in the NFL. His athleticism, his play strength against the run was such an asset of his at Virginia Tech, but his development in terms of his pass protection has been so impressive as well. This dude's just a freaking machine. There's really not a bad word to say about him other than he's just got to stay on the field. But it's not just him stepping up for this offensive line. The left guard, Ezra Cleveland, who went up in our first episode of Studs and Duds, is going to continue climbing here. +1 for Ezra Cleveland, who's having a career year in pass protection. He hasn't really felt like the same guy in a good way, in that if you leave him one-on-one, he's been kind of an open passage for opposing pass rushers for a couple of years. He's continued to be a pretty solid run blocker for them. But yeah, the pass protection really seems to have taken a step up here for Cleveland in a contract year. And then year 2 second round pick Ed Ingram out of LSU has continued to kind of take his lumps, but it has not been like every 5 snaps like it felt like in his rookie season. He's been much more stable, continuing to start at right guard. We'll see what happens though here. Ezra Cleveland missed the Niners game with an injury. I think he's questionable this week, but their free agent acquisition Dalton Reisner did step in against the Niners and looked pretty good. I think Ed Ingram is showing that he's developing and might have a future here. But I am curious, if they put Dalton Reisner in there at right guard, that eliminates any potential weak link you might have. And this offensive line could really cook. We'll see what happens there, but that's not to take away from Ed Ingram starting to show some development. He's a good athlete with a ton of play strength, and it's good to see the technique starting to catch up there. But then onto the defensive side of the ball, the guys going up here are low invested role players. Brian Flores elevating this group. It's super reminiscent of everything he accomplished in Miami with that defense. And Jonathan Bullard is kind of his Zach Sealer, who was another guy he picked up out of nowhere and turned into a good player. Now, I don't know if Bullard is going to go on and, end up getting a $35 million contract like Zach Sealer did, but he's doing a lot of the similar stuff that Sealer did, at least in the early Brian Flores era. Sealer ended up turning into a pretty good pass rusher too, so it's not a perfect comparison, but at least in terms of being that kind of angle-getting run defender as that sort of 4-eye, 3-tech in this kind of Belichickian front, that's Ben Bullard, man, at 6'3", 295 pounds. He has found a system that really works for him. And the Vikings defense, really since that Eagles game, has been pretty damn solid. And a lot of these guys are a part of it, but Bullard is contributing, as is DJ Wonnum, who, continues to just be a very bland pass rusher. Just kind of the definition of someone that should probably be an edge number 3. Because he can, get some pressure, get after the quarterback a little bit, walk into some sacks. But in years past, he's not been much of a run defender. Well, that has changed under Brian Flores. He has lit a fire under his ass and has gotten him to get off of blocks and make some stops. He already has almost as many defensive stops as he had in his last season. Wonnum playing a little bit better two-way football off the edge. And then Jordan Hicks having like a career year at linebacker right now. His Cardinals days were so mediocre that you forget that he was one of the more fun ascending young linebackers when he was with the Eagles, and he got a huge contract with the Cardinals. He's looking like that guy that got that big contract with Arizona, not the guy that Arizona was, trying to cut for a couple years, that ended up kind of walking ass backwards into Minnesota here. But he has really turned his career back on the right track, and I think Flores and this defense has done a good job to just kind of let him play fast, let him to play physical, and he's a headhunter. He loves to play the run. He's not anything special in coverage for sure, but a little bit of a throwback mentality, and he has probably, I would say, been the biggest factor in the Vikings run defense being better this year. Him and maybe Josh Metellus as well, who we have yet to talk about. But unfortunately, Byron Murphy, another Arizona Cardinal free agent signing here in Minnesota, is going to go down. It was a curious fit. We know the Vikings want to blitz. They want to leave these corners on an island. They want to play man coverage. And Byron Murphy is more of a slot zone heady corner than he is a lockdown man-to-man guy. So it was always a curious signing, and he just hasn't held up that well in coverage. He's actually given up 4 touchdowns this year, 3 of which have come in this week 5 to 7 stretch. He's also missing a ton of tackles in run support. He is not someone that's helping this team defend the run. So he's been a little bit disappointing. It's time we start to lower him. But these 2 safeties, both in a way edged out Lewis Seen, their former first-round pick, for playing time this year, along with Harrison Smith, of course. and they're showing why Brian Flores loves these guys, and they're very different. Bynum has been much more of their deep safety. We raised him in the first episode of Studs and Duds for his involvement on this defense, his consistent tackling. Now the coverage starting to come along. He gets a 2-interception game against the 49ers. He's just turned into a really nice safety for the Vikings. And then Josh Metellus is the linchpin for this defense that has allowed Brian Flores to call this team schematically the way they want to do it. So you'll notice the kind of fun linebacker, Avon Pace. That's an undrafted guy. He's kind of their LB2. You'll notice he's only played like games these last few weeks where he's getting only like 4, 5, 6 snaps. And part of that is because Asamoah has been coming back, their 3rd-round year 2 linebacker. But a bigger part of it is just Josh Metellus is their dime linebacker, and they only need one linebacker when they're trying to, stop the pass. And Metellus has been wearing that hat, but he's also coming down and being their kind of slot corner box safety and their base fronts to help stop the run. He's a captain of this defense. He's everywhere. He's been really one of the better run defending safeties in the NFL, kind of doing his best Adrian Phillips, Jamal Adams, Derwin James, Kyle Duggar impression, and he's been a really good player. He's got speed. He's not just a thumping big-bodied safety. Like he's held up okay in coverage. They've been going after him because teams see a thicker, strong safety type in the slot. They're going to target him, and Metellus is going to lose. But that's kind of a schematic choice that the Vikings have made here, and it has led to a really good overall team result with this roster. So there's your Vikings. There's your Studs and Duds. I guess I do have Kirk Cousins as a note. We can end on Kirk Cousins here. I didn't quite feel right raising him. I feel like he's been mostly normal Kirk Cousins this year, but that Niners game was really impressive. And if that's how he wants to continue playing, he's gonna go up, even though he's rated as an 81, kind of feels like the cap of where Kirk Cousins belongs. But man, he was good in that Niners game. And even if he's not going up here necessarily, I felt like he deserves to at least get a mention for kind of doing his own Tom Brady impression in that game against the 49ers. But that gets a big old voila from me. We have completed another episode of Studs and Duds. We will be back in 2 more weeks for the AFC episode. And then we'll kind of reassess how many more of these we'll have as the second half of the season approaches here. So stay tuned for an update on the scheduling for the series there. But thank you so much for watching. Please do hit that like button down below. Let me know as well in the comments if you thought I missed anybody, where I was right, where I was wrong. And we'll see you guys later. Peace out.